consistent with where we were going and what we're doing. I'd like to show, there's 2 clips, and I'd like you, without filtering for myself, I'd like to show you those clips. Hopefully the audio will be adequate from our previous hearing, and then have you respond to each of these. Recognize myself. I want to pick up Colonel Fossil on where we were before. You had made a recommendation, a formal recommendation, to bring in help, support, IG. What happened when you made that request?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I talked about previously and touched on it, the request that I made to Ambassador Moorfield went forward, and then I was told by Lieutenant General Caldwell and staff to retract it, and I did that by telephone and later by email.
What specifically did he say to you, and what was his justification for not doing this?
Prior to that, there was a meeting. In fact, there were 2 meetings, and I don't think we talked about those, but the first meeting involved myself, Steve Anderson, Scholar Geller, Marion Amrine, General Patton, Lieutenant General Caldwell, and that's all I can recall right now. But that meeting is where General Caldwell came in, and he was visibly upset that we had made the DOD-IG request for, and at that time, an investigation or assistance visit, an inquiry, due to the circumstances in the hospital.
Why would he be upset about that? What did he specifically say?
After that meeting, there was a shorter meeting in his office, and that was between me, obviously Lieutenant General Caldwell, Colonel Bush, his Chief of Staff, and Lieutenant Colonel Brett Sylvia, his military aide. And he was visibly upset, again, because I don't think that, and this is my conjecture, that Dr. Kim and him had a chance to talk about this situation in the hospital, okay? But his first response to me was, how could we do this or make this request with elections coming? And then he made the really, again, shocking comment that he calls me Bill.
What does that mean?
Well, I took it as that he was referring to the President of the United States.
General Caldwell, your response?
Thank you, Chairman. There's about 3 things there. One is, and I'll try to walk through them as he made different statements there. One was that he was told to retract the request for the IG assistance that we're requesting. And in fact, I think in his own words, he writes, I'd like to quote, because this is important to know what he said at that time. He perhaps has forgotten, but I'd like to be very clear. He said, I spoke with Lieutenant General Caldwell this evening about the email below. That's the request for the DOD-IG assistance visits. And he says, Lieutenant General Caldwell respectfully requests not to move on this request for assistance until he briefs General Petraeus on this issue. He agrees with the substance of this email. So the wording that he used was not the wording that he used that night, and going back and explaining to Ambassador Moorfield what we were trying to do was set the conditions, and so we were asking him to hold on that until we had finished all the necessary and critical coordination. The second one, when he said he had not talked to Dr. Kim yet, that is an accurate statement. Dr. Kim and I had not talked at that point in time, so I was not aware of the earlier afternoon meeting that several of them had had with himself. I don't recall the first of the meetings he refers to there, but I do recall the second one when he was in my office, and as he says, I was upset, and I can tell you I was very concerned. I was upset, and the reason I was is for 3 reasons. And the first one is we had not yet set the conditions to team with our partners. So I hadn't informed General Petraeus, my superior, that we were going to bring an outside agency in and seek assistance, which would eventually The only way this would succeed, the reason we were bringing this outside team in was to seek the removal of General Yaftali. And so if we didn't bring General Petraeus in, the ultimate goal of bringing this team was to remove Yaftali and expose this corruption. And I would need the President of Afghanistan to acknowledge it and not deny it in the end. And so, and again, if you look at the events that occurred in the previous few months, there had been some death of Afghan civilians, accusations Americans were doing these things. There were some very tense relationships between General Petraeus and the President of Afghanistan. So I wanted to make sure General Petraeus was aware that we were going to bring this organization in to help assist us, which eventually, the end state being the removal for sure of Yaftali, and then obviously the ability to now start fixing the medical system. I also wanted to include our Afghan partners. I was upset because I had not gone back to the Minister of Defense and told him I'm going to officially do this. He and I, along with General Patton, had been talking to him for some time about the corruption we were seeing. He himself had launched his own internal investigation based on information we had given him, and yet they had not been able to bring it to a point where it would enable them to remove him. So I wanted to make sure he was on board. The second point was, it stated in the email that he wrote that evening back to Ambassador Moorfield that we did not have to have, he said, P4's approval, referring to General Petraeus. We may not have needed General Petraeus's approval, but the ultimate objective of what we are trying to achieve through this would never have occurred without General Petraeus's involvement and association with this effort. I needed General Petraeus's help, and he was the senior commander, and if nothing else, out of just due courtesy and respect, I owed him to tell him what I was doing as I was doing it. So I was upset that he would say that when he full well know that, again, I go back to my 3 tenets. The tenet of transparency: be transparent with our Afghan counterparts, be transparent with my boss and what I'm doing, team with my Afghan partners, one of my tenets. We weren't doing any of that. And then the third point was it contained inaccurate information. He specifically states in that email when he writes it that again, we met with Dr. Kim today, and he has briefed General Caldwell on the prospect of this DOD-IG SPO conducting this inspection assessment. Lieutenant Colonel General Caldwell and Dr. Kim welcome your involvement. Well, that was an inaccurate statement. I had not yet been briefed, and I did not yet know about this. And so we were, in fact, telling the Department of Defense IG's office something that was inaccurate.
Wait, what was the date on that again?
Again, this is the evening of the October 28th.
Did you, but in September, the first week of September, you had a Wall Street Journal article, the things that Mr. Gowdy talked about. You telling me you just dismissed that? I mean, you sent it to your commander.
Chairman, if I could, I believe you're referring to 2011, not 2010. I don't want to correct you. I just
No, I want you to. I want to get this, I want to have this clarified.
No, I think the Wall Street Journal article occurred in 2011.
Exactly.
This was still in 2010. And so I was upset with my IG because for the sake of just a few hours, I was returned that evening from traveling to one of our training sites inside of Afghanistan, coming back to the headquarters, and everybody knew I'd be back that evening. For the sake of a couple hours, we could have waited and brought me in and briefed me. And my first response would have been, we absolutely need to do this. We've been talking about doing this for months. We've set the conditions with General Petraeus. Let me now write them. In fact, what I do the very next morning, Mr. Chairman, is I send General Petraeus a very detailed note explaining to him that we're going to do this, seeking his approval, let him know we want to move forward. And simultaneously, General Patton, and he can talk about it, he pulls the team together and starts all the internal coordination that we're going to do to make sure we're teaming with our Afghan partners and being very transparent with them and how we're going to move forward. Again, if we're going to do this, we want to remove General Yaftali. That was absolutely essential. If he was not removed, anything we dealt with down at the lower levels would have been for naught. It would have been a temporary fix, and the corruption would have crept right back in.
And General, with the benefit of hindsight, granted, I'm not there in real time dealing with all the other headaches that you have. This is not the only thing that was on your plate. Granted, I understand that. What I think is a disconnect for me, in at least your approach there, is that one would exclude the other. it seems to be that bringing in the resources of the Inspector General would add to the case your ability to be more transparent, to understand what was happening in this situation. You knew from the beginning of your command that you didn't have the resources you needed to uncover all the corruption, again, not just at this hospital, but throughout the government. And what is concerning, the reason, and again, if we had one colonel express an opinion, of course we would listen to that. When you have 3 colonels come before us and say this was just absolutely untenable, and we did not get the resources, we did not have the support, we did not move as swiftly as we can, we were not as transparent, that's in part why we're doing this investigation. So with all due respect, I've gone way over my time. General, we'll give you ample time to continue to respond, but let me recognize the ranking member, Mr. Tierney.